The cry came from nowhere. At least that was what Ethan Cole thought at first. One moment, the afternoon was quiet. The next, a woman's voice echoed across the water. Help! Ethan immediately pulled his horse to a stop. The chestnut gelding lifted its head, ears forward, listening. The cowboy listened too. For several seconds, nothing happened. Only wind. Only water. Only the distant call of birds circling above Eagle Lake. Then the voice came again. Louder this time. Desperate. Please. Somebody help me. Ethan frowned. Most travelers would have continued riding. The Arizona territory was full of strange sounds. Arguments. Drunks. Trouble that belonged to someone else. Wise men often avoided such things. Ethan had never been particularly wise. He turned his horse toward the lake. The shoreline appeared moments later. Cottonwood trees lined the water. Tall grass moved beneath the wind. Sunlight danced across the surface of the lake. Everything looked peaceful, except it wasn't. A woman stood waist-deep near the center of a small cove. She looked young, perhaps 25, perhaps younger. Long black hair hung wet against her shoulders. Her eyes immediately locked onto him. Relief flooded her face. Thank God. Ethan quickly looked away. Not out of fear, out of respect. Something was clearly wrong. Very wrong. The woman remained partially hidden by the water. And suddenly the situation became obvious. There were no clothes on the shore. No saddle. No horse. Nothing. Only footprints. Lots of footprints. The cowboy slowly removed his hat, then stared toward the opposite side of the lake. Several sets of tracks disappeared into the trees. Fresh tracks. Recent. Very recent. Ethan already knew what had happened. Someone thought they were being funny. The woman swallowed hard. Embarrassment battled frustration across her face. They took everything. Ethan nodded. He had expected that answer. The Arizona frontier produced many decent people. Unfortunately, it also produced idiots. The woman crossed her arms against the cold water, trying to preserve what dignity remained. My horse. Her voice cracked slightly. My clothes. Ethan looked toward the tracks again, then back toward the trees. A few distant laughs drifted through the forest. The sound immediately answered every question. Teenagers, or men who never grew up. Neither possibility improved the situation. The woman noticed his expression. You hear them too? Yeah. The cowboy sighed, then removed the bedroll tied behind his saddle. The woman looked confused. Ethan carefully turned his back toward the lake, then tossed the rolled blanket onto a patch of grass near the shoreline. I'll wait over there. The woman stared, apparently surprised. Most men would have stared. Many would have laughed. Others might have made the situation worse. Instead, the stranger simply gave her privacy. The woman hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. Ethan walked 50 yards away. Far enough. Not too far. The lake remained behind him. The trees remained ahead. And somewhere among those trees, someone was still laughing. The cowboy sat on a fallen log, patiently waiting. Several minutes passed. The wind continued moving through the cottonwoods. A hawk circled overhead. The afternoon sun drifted lower. Eventually, footsteps approached. Ethan looked up. The woman stood there wrapped securely in the blanket. The makeshift garment reached nearly to her boots. Her expression remained guarded, yet calmer now. Safer. The cowboy immediately stood. For a moment, neither spoke. The woman studied him carefully. Dust-covered hat, weathered coat, tired eyes. A man shaped by long roads. You didn't have to stop. Ethan shrugged. Seemed like the right thing to do. The answer appeared to surprise her. The woman glanced toward the lake, then toward the tracks. I should introduce myself. The cowboy nodded. Aiyana. She extended a hand. Ethan shook it. Ethan. Her grip felt firm, stronger than he expected. Not the hand of someone accustomed to depending on others. Interesting. Very interesting. Aiyana followed his gaze toward the forest. They've been bothering travelers for weeks. You know them? Not personally. A faint smile appeared, which is probably why they felt brave enough to do this. The comment carried more truth than humor. Ethan noticed something then. Something important. Aiyana wasn't frightened, embarrassed, angry, humiliated. Yes, but not frightened. That meant something. People raised around hardship rarely panicked easily. The cowboy glanced toward the tracks again. Still fresh. Still obvious. Still leading somewhere. You said they took your horse too. The smile vanished. Immediately, the reaction told him everything. The horse mattered. A lot. More than the clothes. More than the humiliation. more than the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Aiyana nodded slowly. My father gave me that horse. Silence. He died last winter. The words hung heavily between them. Ethan understood loss. Everyone on the frontier understood loss. Some simply carried it better than others. The cowboy looked toward the trees, decision settling inside him. Then he reached for the reins. Aiyana noticed. What are you doing? Ethan adjusted his hat. The answer came simply. Getting your horse back. For the first time since meeting him, Aiyana genuinely smiled. A small smile. A hopeful smile. Then Ethan stopped. Something near the shoreline had caught his attention. A set of tracks. Different from the others. Much larger. Much deeper. The cowboy slowly crouched beside them. Studying. Thinking. Aiyana stepped closer. What is it? Ethan didn't answer immediately. His eyes followed the tracks toward the forest. Toward the same direction the thieves had gone. But these weren't their footprints. Not even close. The prints belonged to a man. A very large man. And unlike the others, he wasn't running. He was following. The cowboy's expression hardened. Because suddenly this looked less like a prank. And more like something else. Something dangerous. The forest suddenly felt quieter. Not safer. Just quieter. Ethan remained crouched beside the tracks, studying them. The deeper prints continued into the trees. Straight. Steady. Purposeful. Nothing about them looked accidental. Aiyana stood nearby, wrapped in the blanket. Watching him. The wind moved gently through the cottonwoods behind them. The lake shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Everything appeared peaceful. Yet neither of them felt peaceful anymore. Finally Ethan stood. His eyes moved toward the smaller footprints, then toward the larger ones. How many men took your horse? Aiyana thought for a moment. 4. Ethan nodded. That matched the tracks. 4 young men. 1 unknown follower. Not ideal. The cowboy adjusted his hat, then looked toward the trees. We should move. Aiyana frowned. You think they're dangerous? The answer came immediately. No. That surprised her. Ethan pointed toward the smaller tracks. Those idiots aren't dangerous. Then he pointed toward the deeper prints. I'm not sure about him. Silence followed. Aiyana studied the tracks again. For the first time, concern appeared in her eyes. Because Ethan wasn't the type to worry without reason. Several minutes later, they entered the forest. The trail proved easy to follow. The thieves hadn't bothered hiding their path. Why would they? People who believed they would never face consequences rarely acted carefully. Broken branches marked the route. Fresh hoofprints appeared frequently. And every now and then, laughter echoed ahead. The same laughter from before. The kind people used when they believed someone else's humiliation was entertaining. Aiyana's jaw tightened. Ethan noticed. You know them. It wasn't a question. The Apache woman sighed. Sort of. The cowboy waited. Eventually, she continued. They come from Ash Creek. A small settlement several miles away. Ethan knew it. Everyone in the territory knew it. A cattle town. Money. Influence. Families who believed rules existed mainly for other people. The pieces started fitting together. One of the young men likely saw an Apache woman bathing alone, then decided to turn it into a joke. The others followed. Cowardice often traveled in groups. The trail eventually climbed a rocky slope. From the top, voices became clearer. The thieves weren't hiding. They weren't worried. And that told Ethan exactly what kind of men they were. The cowboy motioned for Aiyana to stay low, then carefully moved forward. The ridge overlooked a small clearing. 4 horses grazed nearby. 1 extra horse stood tied to a tree. Aiyana immediately inhaled sharply. My horse. The relief in her voice was unmistakable. The gray mare appeared frightened, but unharmed. For now, near a campfire sat 4 young men, all dressed better than most ranch hands. Expensive boots, clean shirts, the confidence that often accompanies inherited money. One of them held Aiyana's saddle. Another waved part of her clothing like a trophy. The others laughed. The sight made Ethan's expression harden. Not because he was angry, because he was disappointed. There was a difference. The tallest young man suddenly stood, trying to imitate a speech, mocking, performing for his friends. The others laughed harder. Aiyana quietly looked away. Embarrassment returned. Not because she was weak, because cruelty always hurts, no matter how strong someone becomes. Ethan finally stood up. Completely. No attempt to hide. No attempt to sneak. The laughter below stopped immediately. 4 heads turned. 4 confused expressions followed. The tallest young man frowned. Who are you? Ethan started walking downhill. Slowly, calmly, Aiyana followed several steps behind. The young men exchanged glances, apparently uncertain, because the stranger approaching them wasn't angry, wasn't shouting, wasn't threatening anyone. The cowboy simply looked tired, very tired, and somehow that made him harder to read. The tall young man forced a smile. You lost. No. The answer was simple. The smile weakened slightly. Ethan pointed toward the gray mare. That's her horse. Silence. Then several of the young men laughed. One rolled his eyes. Another tossed a stick into the fire. Apparently, they expected this conversation. The tall man folded his arms. It was a joke. Nobody answered. The cowboy looked toward the horse, then toward the clothing, then back toward the young men. It wasn't funny. Silence. The words landed harder than shouting would have. The tall man shifted slightly. Uncomfortable. Only slightly. We didn't hurt her. Ethan nodded. I know. The young man seemed relieved. Then Ethan continued. You humiliated her. The relief vanished immediately. Around the campfire, the mood changed. Because suddenly someone had named the truth. Directly. Without hesitation. Without excuses. The tallest man laughed again. But now the sound felt forced. She's Apache. The statement hung in the air. Aiyana lowered her eyes. Not from shame. From exhaustion. She had heard that sentence before. Too many times. The implication remained familiar. As though being Apache somehow made disrespect acceptable. Ethan looked at the young man for several seconds. Then asked a question. A simple question. One that nobody expected. So. Silence. The campfire crackled softly. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. The young man's confidence seemed to stumble. Because he had prepared arguments. Prepared excuses. Prepared insults. He hadn't prepared for that question. Ethan repeated it. So. The young man opened his mouth. Then closed it. No answer came. Because there wasn't one. Finally, the cowboy pointed toward the horse. Give her things back. The tall man looked toward his friends. Searching for support. Finding very little. Something about Ethan made the situation feel different. Not dangerous. Just embarrassing. For them. One by one, the smiles disappeared. The performance ended. The joke stopped being funny. Eventually, one young man stood. Then another. Without speaking, they gathered the stolen belongings. The tall man hesitated the longest. Pride often does. But eventually, even he surrendered. Several minutes later, Aiyana held her belongings again. The blanket remained around her shoulders. Yet something had changed. The humiliation no longer belonged to her. It belonged to them. The young men avoided her eyes. Avoided Ethan's too. As the cowboy led the gray mare forward, Aiyana gently touched the horse's neck. Relief flooded her face. Then suddenly her expression changed. Instantly. Concern. Real concern. The mare limped slightly. Barely noticeable. Yet noticeable enough. Aiyana immediately knelt beside the front leg. Her hands examined the joint carefully. The smile vanished. Completely. Ethan saw it. What is it? Aiyana looked up. Worry filling her eyes. Someone had injured the horse. Not badly. But enough. Enough to threaten the long journey home. And for the first time that day, the stolen clothes no longer seemed like the real problem. The clearing suddenly felt smaller. Not because the trees had moved. Because the problem had changed. A few minutes ago, Aiyana's clothes had seemed important. Now they weren't. The gray mare struggled to put weight on her front leg. And that changed everything. Aiyana remained kneeling beside the horse. Her hand moved carefully along the injured joint. The mare flinched. Only slightly. But enough. Enough to make Aiyana close her eyes. The four young men exchanged uncomfortable glances. For the first time all afternoon, nobody was laughing. Ethan studied the injury. What happened? Silence. The tallest young man avoided his gaze. Another stared at the ground. Finally, one of them spoke. It slipped. Nobody believed him. Not completely. Not even his friends. The cowboy looked at the damaged terrain near the camp. Fresh hoof marks covered the dirt. Signs of hard riding. Sudden turns. Reckless handling. Someone had pushed the mare too hard. Aiyana already knew it. The young men knew it too. The truth didn't need words. The silence said enough. The tall young man finally muttered something. We didn't mean to hurt it. Aiyana didn't answer. Because intentions didn't change injuries. The mare remained lame. The damage remained real. Ethan slowly exhaled, then crouched beside the horse. Years on ranches had taught him a few things. Not enough to call himself a veterinarian. Enough to recognize trouble. His fingers gently examined the leg. The mare remained surprisingly calm. Perhaps because Aiyana stood nearby. Perhaps because animals often sensed kindness better than people did. Several moments passed. Finally, Ethan stood. Not broken. Relief immediately appeared on Aiyana's face. Then faded. Because not broken wasn't the same as healthy. Can she travel? The cowboy considered the question. Then shook his head. Not today. Aiyana looked toward the western horizon. The sun had already begun descending. That worried her. Ethan noticed. You were planning to leave tonight. It wasn't a question. The Apache woman nodded. My camp is 3 days away. 3 days. Under normal circumstances. With an injured horse. Possibly much longer. The situation grew worse with every calculation. The tall young man shifted awkwardly. Then surprised everyone. I know a horse doctor. Nobody answered. Apparently, he mistook silence for encouragement. He lives near Ash Creek. Still silence. The young man swallowed. His confidence had completely vanished. Because for perhaps the first time in his life, money couldn't immediately solve the problem he had helped create. Ethan finally nodded. Where? The answer came quickly, as if the young man desperately wanted redemption. 2 miles south. The cowboy looked toward Aiyana. She understood immediately. A choice needed to be made. Travel now. Risk further injury. Or seek help. The decision wasn't difficult. The horse decided for them. The mare attempted another step, then nearly stumbled. Aiyana immediately caught the reins. Her expression hardened. We find a doctor. The young men visibly relaxed. Grateful the conversation was ending. Ethan wasn't finished. Not quite. Before leaving, he stopped beside the tallest one. The young man looked nervous. For good reason. The cowboy's voice remained calm. Very calm. Which somehow felt worse. Next time, the young man swallowed. Yeah. Ethan adjusted his hat. Find a different joke. Then he walked away. No threats. No shouting. No violence. Yet somehow the young man looked as though he wished he had received all three. Aiyana hid a small smile. The first genuine smile Ethan had seen from her. Minutes later they started south. The gray mare moved carefully. Slowly. Painfully. Ethan walked beside her, leading his own horse by the reins. The afternoon stretched into evening. The Arizona sky slowly transformed. Blue became orange. Orange became gold. Then crimson. The desert looked beautiful. Most dangerous places often did. For nearly an hour, neither spoke much. Not because conversation felt awkward. Because both had spent enough years alone to become comfortable with silence. Eventually, Aiyana broke it. You embarrassed them. Ethan glanced over. Good. The answer made her laugh. A real laugh this time. Brief. Unexpected. Yet genuine. The sound surprised both of them. Especially Aiyana. Because laughter had become rare recently. Very rare. The trail curved through a valley lined with cottonwoods. Shadows stretched longer. The air cooled. Somewhere ahead a hawk cried. The familiar sound stirred old memories. Aiyana stared toward the horizon. My father taught me to ride. Ethan listened quietly. He said a horse tells you who a person really is. The cowboy nodded slowly. That sounded like wisdom earned rather than invented. What did he mean? Aiyana gently touched the mare's neck. He said cruel people can't hide from animals. Interesting. Very interesting. Ethan looked at the injured mare. Then remembered the campfire. The stolen clothing. The laughter. The embarrassed silence afterward. Maybe her father had been right. The conversation faded. For a while only hoofbeats filled the evening air. Then Ethan noticed something. Something strange. The larger footprints. The mysterious tracks from the lake. They had disappeared. Completely. That bothered him. Because tracks didn't simply vanish. Not usually. The cowboy slowed slightly, scanning the terrain. The desert remained quiet. Too quiet. Aiyana noticed. What is it? The tracks. She immediately understood. The large man. The unknown follower. The one Ethan had noticed near the lake. You think he's still nearby? The cowboy didn't answer immediately. Because he honestly didn't know. And uncertainty often worried him more than danger. Finally he shrugged. Maybe. The response wasn't reassuring. The sun finally disappeared behind distant hills. Darkness approached quickly. Then they saw it. A lantern. Far ahead. Glowing softly against the gathering night. A building emerged beyond it. Then a corral. Then a stable. The horse doctor. Relief appeared on Aiyana's face. At last. Some good fortune. But as they approached the property, Ethan's expression suddenly changed. His eyes narrowed. His hand drifted toward his revolver. Because tied beside the stable stood a massive black horse. And beside that horse, the deepest boot prints Ethan had ever seen. The same tracks from Eagle Lake. The mysterious man had arrived first. The lantern swayed gently in the evening wind. Its warm light spilled across the stable yard. Long shadows stretched over the ground. Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the black horse. The animal was enormous. Larger than most cavalry mounts. Powerful. Calm. The kind of horse that belonged to someone experienced. Someone dangerous. Beside it stood the tracks. Deep. Wide. Unmistakable. The same tracks from Eagle Lake. Aiyana noticed Ethan stop. Immediately her expression tightened. What is it? The cowboy nodded toward the horse. The man from the lake. She followed his gaze. For several seconds neither spoke. The stable appeared quiet. Too quiet. No voices. No movement. Only the sound of crickets emerging from the darkness. Then a door opened. A warm rectangle of light appeared. An older man stepped outside. Gray beard. Suspenders. Weathered hands. The horse doctor. He carried a lantern. Then noticed the visitors. His expression brightened. Evening. Ethan relaxed slightly. The old man didn't look worried. Didn't look frightened. That mattered. People living alone learned to recognize danger quickly. If the horse's owner frightened him, it would show. The doctor approached. Then noticed the injured mare. His smile vanished immediately. What happened? Aiyana answered. Bad riders. The old man nodded. Apparently that explained everything. Within minutes the mare stood inside the stable. The doctor carefully examined the leg. His experienced fingers moved slowly. Methodically. Finally he stepped back. She'll recover. Relief flooded Aiyana's face. The tension she'd carried since the lake finally loosened. But every rancher feared that word. The doctor sighed. She needs rest. Aiyana closed her eyes, already knowing what came next. How long? 3 days. Silence. 3 days. Not impossible, but inconvenient. Very inconvenient. The old man looked between them, then pointed toward a small guest cabin. You can stay. Aiyana immediately shook her head. We don't have money. The doctor laughed softly. You have an injured horse. Apparently that settled the matter. The old man turned toward Ethan. And you? Ethan glanced toward the black horse. Still thinking. Still calculating. Who's the owner? The doctor's expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. Big fella named Jacob. Interesting. The name meant nothing. The tracks did. The doctor continued. Arrived this afternoon. Friendly. The old man chuckled. Depends who you ask. That wasn't reassuring. Not at all. Aiyana noticed. You know him? No. The doctor scratched his beard. But I've treated his horses for years. Years. That meant something. The old man lowered his voice slightly. He's not a bad man. Then he paused. Just doesn't like people. That made Ethan smile. For some reason, he understood that feeling. The doctor pointed toward a nearby building. He's eating supper. As if summoned by the conversation. The door opened. Heavy footsteps followed. The largest man Ethan had seen in years stepped onto the porch. 6'6". Maybe taller. Broad shoulders. Dark coat. Black hat. The kind of man people noticed immediately. The kind of man children remembered. He stopped. Studied the yard. Then noticed Ethan. Neither man spoke. The silence lasted several seconds. Long enough to become awkward. Then the giant nodded once. A simple greeting. Nothing more. Ethan nodded back. The giant disappeared inside again. That was it. No confrontation. No threats. Nothing. Yet somehow the encounter felt important. Aiyana quietly exhaled. I thought he'd be worse. The doctor laughed. Most people do. Hours later darkness fully settled over the ranch. Stars covered the Arizona sky. Thousands of them. Bright. Ancient. Silent. Aiyana sat alone outside the guest cabin. A small fire crackled nearby. The mare rested safely in the stable. For the first time all day, things felt calm. Almost peaceful. Footsteps approached. Ethan appeared carrying 2 tin cups. Coffee. He handed one to her. Aiyana accepted. Thank you. The cowboy sat nearby. Not too close. Not too far. The fire danced between them. For several moments neither spoke. Eventually Aiyana broke the silence. You could have kept writing. Ethan smiled slightly. We already discussed that. Not really. The smile faded. Because she was right. They hadn't. Not completely. The Apache woman stared into the flames. Most people don't stop. The words sounded simple, yet carried years of experience. Years of disappointment. Ethan understood, perhaps more than she realized. Most people are busy. Aiyana laughed. Softly. That's one way to describe it. The fire popped, sending sparks into the darkness. For a while they watched them rise, then disappear. Finally Ethan asked a question. What happened to your tribe? Aiyana didn't answer immediately. The question carried weight. Pain. Memories. Eventually she spoke. War. One word. Enough to explain many things. The frontier had consumed countless families. White. Apache. Everyone. My father survived it. Her voice softened. Barely. Ethan listened quietly. He spent the rest of his life teaching me how not to become bitter. Interesting. Very interesting. The cowboy looked toward the stars. That sounded like wisdom worth remembering. Aiyana smiled sadly. He failed sometimes. Everybody does. That answer surprised her, then made her smile again. A genuine smile. The second one today. Progress. Small progress. Yet real. The night deepened. The ranch grew silent. One by one lanterns disappeared, until only moonlight remained. Eventually Aiyana stood. We should sleep. Ethan nodded. Tomorrow would bring decisions. And perhaps trouble. The Apache woman walked toward the cabin, then stopped. Something had caught her attention. Movement. Near the stable. A shadow. Large. Watching. Her body instantly tensed. Ethan saw it too. His hand moved toward his revolver. The figure stepped into the moonlight. Not a thief. Not an outlaw. The giant. Jacob. The man with the deepest tracks. He stood beside the stable, looking directly at Aiyana. Not speaking. Just staring. Then he said something unexpected. Something that made every hair on Ethan's neck stand up. I know who you're running from. Silence crashed across the ranch. Aiyana froze. The color drained from her face. Because suddenly, the danger wasn't behind them anymore. It had already caught up. Silence settled over the ranch. Heavy. Uncomfortable. The moon hung high above the stable yard, casting pale light across the buildings. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Jacob stood beside the stable, his massive frame almost blending into the darkness. Aiyana remained frozen. The color had not returned to her face. Ethan noticed immediately, because fear looked different from surprise. And what he saw now was fear. Real fear. The kind that came from memory, not imagination. Jacob looked at her. Not threatening. Not angry. Just certain. I know who you're running from. The words lingered in the night air. Finally, Ethan stepped forward. Slightly. Not enough to provoke. Enough to place himself closer to Aiyana. The giant noticed. His eyes shifted briefly toward the cowboy, then back to the Apache woman. You don't remember me. Aiyana frowned. For several seconds, she searched his face. Nothing. No recognition. Jacob nodded slowly. I didn't think you would. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere inside the stable a horse shifted. The entire ranch seemed to be listening. Finally Jacob spoke again. 12 years ago. Aiyana's eyes narrowed. 12 years ago, your father saved my life. Everything stopped. Even Ethan blinked. The statement had not been expected. Not even close. Aiyana stared. Confused. Suspicious. My father. Jacob nodded. The giant removed his hat, holding it in both hands. An oddly respectful gesture. I was younger. A faint smile touched his face. Much more foolish. That part sounded believable. The smile vanished. I got lost during a winter storm. Aiyana remained silent, listening. Despite herself, Jacob glanced toward the mountains in the distance, as if seeing another time, another life. I would have frozen to death. The ranch fell quiet again. Then he continued. Your father found me. Interesting. Very interesting. Ethan folded his arms. The pieces still didn't fit. Not yet. Jacob seemed to understand. He didn't know me. The giant shrugged. Didn't matter. Aiyana swallowed. Because that sounded exactly like her father. Exactly. Jacob looked toward her. He carried me 3 miles through snow. The words landed heavily. Not because they sounded dramatic. Because they sounded true. People rarely invented stories that simple. The giant smiled faintly. He complained the entire time. For the first time, a tiny smile appeared on Aiyana's face. Her father had been famous for that, helping people while pretending he didn't want to. Jacob noticed and nodded. The memory belonged to both of them now. Then, the smile disappeared. Immediately. Because the story wasn't finished. Not even close. Jacob's voice grew serious. 3 weeks ago, I was in Tucson. Aiyana stiffened. The reaction was instant. Ethan saw it. So did Jacob. The giant nodded. You know the name? She did. Of course she did. Everyone running from danger eventually learns the names attached to it. Aiyana looked away. Jacob continued. I heard men talking. The fire popped, sending sparks upward. The giant's expression darkened. They were looking for an Apache woman. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Everyone already knew who that woman was. Jacob's eyes settled on Aiyana. They had a description. Silence. A horse. More silence. A silver necklace. Aiyana's hand immediately moved toward her throat. Instinctively, the necklace remained there, hidden beneath her clothing. A gift from her father. Something she never removed. Jacob slowly nodded. That's when I knew. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. Softly, almost mournfully, Ethan finally asked the question. Who are they? The giant looked toward him. For the first time all evening. They work for Henry Blackwood. The name meant nothing to Ethan, but everything to Aiyana. Her eyes closed. Briefly, painfully. That reaction alone explained enough. Jacob saw it. You told him. Aiyana nodded once. Very slowly. The giant sighed. Not surprised. Not disappointed. Just tired. As though he had expected this all along. Ethan looked between them, now thoroughly confused. What did she tell him? No answer came immediately. Aiyana stared into the fire, watching the flames, watching memories. Finally she spoke. I witnessed a murder. The words barely rose above a whisper. Yet they seemed louder than anything else that night. The ranch became completely silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Ethan didn't interrupt. Didn't rush her. Aiyana appreciated that. More than he realized. Several moments passed. Then she continued. For years ago. Her hands tightened. I was gathering herbs near a river. The memory clearly hurt. Jacob remained still. Listening. Respecting it. Aiyana swallowed. Then forced herself onward. I saw Henry Blackwood's son shoot a man. The words hung in the darkness. Unmoving. Heavy. Ethan felt something shift. Suddenly the story made sense. The fear. The running. The silence. All of it. Aiyana stared at the flames. He wasn't defending himself. Her voice cracked slightly. There was no fight. Pain crossed her face. He just killed him. Nobody spoke. Because some truths deserved silence. Aiyana continued. I thought nobody saw me. Jacob quietly shook his head. But they did. The Apache woman nodded. Yes. A long pause followed. Then Ethan asked the obvious question. If they knew you witnessed it. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Aiyana answered anyway. They've been looking for me ever since. The giant stared into the darkness beyond the ranch, toward places only he could see. Then he said something that made Ethan's stomach tighten. They finally found your trail. Silence. The words settled over the fire. Over the ranch. Over the night. Aiyana looked up. What do you mean? Jacob's jaw hardened. The expression transformed his face. For the first time he looked dangerous. Not because he wanted to. Because circumstances demanded it. The giant pointed toward the eastern horizon. Beyond the hills. Beyond the darkness. They're close. Nobody breathed. Jacob's eyes remained fixed on the distance. I passed 6 riders yesterday. The fire crackled softly. The giant's voice dropped lower. Colder. They weren't hunting cattle. Aiyana's face went pale again. Ethan looked toward the darkness. Instinctively, the night suddenly felt much larger. Much less safe. Then Jacob delivered the final piece. The piece that changed everything. They'll reach this ranch by tomorrow afternoon. Silence. Absolute silence. Because for the first time since Eagle Lake, the danger had a face, and it was riding straight toward them. Nobody slept much that night. The ranch remained quiet. But it wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the quiet that comes before a storm. The quiet of people listening for danger. Waiting. Wondering. The fire eventually burned low. The stars slowly crossed the Arizona sky. Yet sleep refused to come. At least for Aiyana. She sat alone outside the cabin, wrapped in a blanket, watching darkness stretch across the valley. Somewhere beyond those hills. 6 riders were coming. 6 men hired by Henry Blackwood. 6 men who had spent years looking for her. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it exhausted her. There is a difference. Fear makes people run. Exhaustion makes them stop. Footsteps approached softly. Aiyana already knew who it was. Ethan sat beside her. Not too close. Not too far. The same distance he always seemed to choose. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt familiar now. Comfortable. Finally Ethan broke it. You thinking about leaving? Aiyana smiled sadly. The answer came quickly. Yes. Then she surprised herself. And no. The cowboy nodded. Apparently, he understood. For several moments, they watched the horizon. Then Aiyana spoke again. They've been chasing me for 4 years. The words drifted into the darkness. I kept moving. She stared at the stars. Different camps. A faint laugh escaped her. Without humor. Different names. Ethan listened. Quietly. Patiently. The way he always did. I told myself I was surviving. The smile vanished. But maybe I was just hiding. Those words hurt. Because they felt true. Painfully true. The cowboy looked toward the distant hills. Then said something simple. Something very Ethan-like. Sometimes those are the same thing. Aiyana considered that. Maybe he was right. For a while. Maybe survival and hiding had been identical. But not anymore. Not tonight. The Apache woman lowered her head. Then asked a question. Would you run? Ethan thought for several seconds. Actually thought. Which was one of the reasons she trusted him. He never rushed answers. Finally he shrugged. Depends. That made her laugh softly. Of course it did. Depends on what? The cowboy looked toward the stable. Toward the sleeping horses. Then toward the cabin. Then toward her. Whether there was anything worth staying for. The answer landed harder than he intended. Aiyana immediately looked away. Pretending to study the fire. Pretending her heartbeat hadn't changed. Neither mentioned it. Neither needed to. The night moved on. Eventually Ethan stood. You should get some sleep. Aiyana nodded. This time she actually tried. Morning arrived with sunlight and dust. The ranch awakened early. The horse doctor fed the animals. Jacob repaired part of a fence. Ethan checked saddles. Life continued. As those 6 armed riders weren't approaching. That impressed Aiyana. The frontier produced strange people. People who kept working even when danger seemed unavoidable. By noon the mare looked slightly better. Not healthy. Better. The doctor appeared pleased. Aiyana should have felt relieved. Instead she felt trapped. The clock was moving. The riders were coming. And she still hadn't decided what to do. The answer arrived unexpectedly. Shortly after lunch. Jacob found her near the stable. The giant leaned against a fence post. Watching cattle in the distance. For several moments neither spoke. Eventually he nodded toward the valley. Beautiful place. Aiyana followed his gaze. It is. Jacob smiled faintly. Your father would have liked it. Silence followed. Then he added something else. Something that changed everything. Which is exactly why he'd be angry. Aiyana frowned. What? Jacob looked directly at her. You've spent 4 years running. The words felt sharp. Not cruel. Just honest. The giant folded his arms. Your father carried a half-frozen stranger through a blizzard. A small smile appeared. He wasn't the running type. The comment stung. Because it was true. Painfully true. Aiyana looked away. Jacob continued. You know why Blackwood keeps searching? She didn't answer. The giant answered for her. Because he's afraid. Interesting. Very interesting. Aiyana blinked. Afraid? The idea seemed absurd. Henry Blackwood controlled towns. Money. Men. Influence. Why would a man like that be afraid? Jacob saw the confusion. Then smiled. The powerful only hunt people who can hurt them. The words struck like lightning. Simple. Clear. Impossible to ignore. For the first time in years. Aiyana saw the situation differently. Not as prey. Not as a victim. As a threat. The witness. The one thing Henry Blackwood couldn't erase. The realization changed something inside her. Something important. That afternoon, dust appeared on the horizon. Far. Away. Small. But unmistakable. Riders. The horse doctor saw them first. Then Ethan. Then Jacob. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The 6 men had arrived. Earlier than expected. The riders remained distant. Watching the ranch. Studying it. Measuring it. Like wolves deciding how close to approach. The atmosphere changed instantly. The air felt heavier. The workers became quieter. Even the horses seemed restless. Ethan stepped beside Aiyana. His eyes never leaving the horizon. You still have time. The meaning was obvious. She could leave. Right now? Take the mare. Disappear again. Start over somewhere else. The same thing she'd been doing for years. Aiyana stared at the distant riders. 6 small figures beneath the Arizona sun. Waiting. Hunting. Expecting her to run. The old Aiyana would have. Without hesitation. The old Aiyana would have been halfway to New Mexico already. But something felt different now. The lake. The horse. Jacob. Her father. Ethan. All of it. The running suddenly felt heavier than staying. For 4 years, she had carried fear. Perhaps long enough. Aiyana slowly lifted her chin, then looked directly at Ethan. The cowboy saw the answer immediately. Before she even spoke, "I won't run." Silence followed. The wind moved through the grass. The riders remained on the horizon, watching, waiting. Aiyana looked toward them, then toward the ranch, then toward the people who had helped her. The fear remained, but something stronger had finally appeared beside it. Resolve. And for the first time in 4 years, Aiyana stopped running. Unfortunately, the men hunting her had just decided to start moving. The riders stopped half a mile from the ranch. They didn't approach. Not immediately. Instead, they waited. 6 silhouettes beneath the Arizona sun. Watching, measuring, calculating. The ranch watched back. Nobody returned to work. Nobody pretended everything was normal. Because it wasn't. The horse doctor stood beside the stable. Jacob leaned against a fence post. Ethan remained near Aiyana. The air itself seemed tense, heavy, waiting. Finally, one of the riders urged his horse forward. The others followed. Slowly, confidently, like men accustomed to getting what they wanted. Dust rose behind them. The ranch fell silent. By the time they reached the gate, everyone understood something. These weren't ordinary bounty hunters. They looked too organized, too comfortable. The lead rider wore a dark coat despite the heat. Silver spurs. Expensive revolver. The kind of man who enjoyed reminding people he carried power. He stopped his horse, surveyed the ranch, then smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. His eyes found Aiyana immediately. Of course they did. They hadn't ridden all this way for cattle. "There she is." The words carried across the yard. Nobody answered. The rider looked amused. "As difficult to find as everyone said." Aiyana stepped forward. Before Ethan could stop her, before Jacob could speak, the fear remained inside her. But it no longer controlled her. The rider studied her carefully, then removed a folded paper from his coat. "Aiyana." Silence. Wanted for questioning. That almost made Ethan laugh. Almost. The rider continued. "In connection with the murder of Samuel Price." Interesting. Very interesting. The lie wasn't even creative. Aiyana frowned. "You know that's not true." The rider shrugged. Truth clearly wasn't his concern. "My concern isn't truth." The honesty startled everyone. Even Jacob blinked. The rider smiled again. "My concern is bringing you back." There it was. The real reason. No courtroom. No investigation. No justice. Just silence. Permanent silence. Jacob pushed away from the fence. The movement immediately attracted attention. The lead rider looked up, then looked up a little more, then realized how large Jacob actually was. The smile weakened slightly. Only slightly. "Problem." Jacob folded his arms. "Several." The rider sighed, apparently tired of complications. His gaze returned to Aiyana. "This doesn't concern anyone else." The giant laughed. A low sound. "Dangerous." That's usually how trouble starts. Several ranch hands quietly moved closer. Not aggressively, just close enough. The lead rider noticed. His expression hardened. The atmosphere shifted. The game was changing. Then Ethan surprised everyone, including Aiyana. The cowboy stepped forward, calmly, as though discussing whether. "You said Samuel Price." The rider nodded. "Correct." Ethan adjusted his hat. "Funny." The rider frowned. "Why?" The cowboy looked genuinely curious. "Because Samuel Price isn't dead." Silence exploded across the ranch. The rider froze. Only briefly. But Ethan saw it. So did Jacob. So did Aiyana. The mistake had landed. Hard. The rider recovered quickly. Too quickly. Different Samuel Price. Nobody believed that. Not even the other riders. One of them actually looked confused. The lead rider glared at Ethan, now openly annoyed. The cowboy remained calm. That somehow made everything worse. The rider's hand drifted slightly closer to his revolver. The ranch immediately tensed. Jacob noticed. Ethan noticed. Everyone noticed. The lead rider suddenly smiled again. But this smile looked forced. Artificial. Like a mask. "We can do this peacefully." Nobody moved. Nobody answered. Then a voice came from behind the stable. An old voice. Unexpected. The horse doctor. The old man slowly stepped forward, holding something in his hands. A weathered ledger. Nothing more. The rider frowned. "What is that?" The old man looked nervous. Terrified, actually. Yet he continued walking. One slow step after another. Until he reached the center of the yard. Then he opened the ledger. "My records." Silence. The rider's eyes narrowed. The old man swallowed hard, then continued. 3 years ago, a page turned. Henry Blackwood's son brought a wounded horse here. Nobody interrupted. The old man found the page, then pointed. The same day Samuel Price disappeared. Interesting. Very interesting. The lead rider's expression changed. The confidence faded. Just slightly. Enough. The old man continued. The horse had blood on the saddle. The ranch became completely silent. Aiyana stared. Jacob stared. Even Ethan seemed surprised. The old doctor's hands trembled. Yet he kept talking. Because sometimes courage arrives late. But still arrives. I wrote everything down. Another page turned. The date. Another page. The injuries. Another page. The names. The lead rider's face hardened. Dangerously. Suddenly, everyone understood. This wasn't only about Aiyana anymore. Another witness existed. An unexpected one. The rider's hand moved toward his revolver again. Faster this time. Jacob instantly stepped forward. The giant's shadow swallowed half the yard. The rider stopped. Not because he wanted to. Because he had to. For several seconds, nobody breathed. Then Ethan noticed something. Movement. Far beyond the ranch. Near the western ridge. More riders. Several of them. Approaching quickly. Dust rising behind them. The lead rider saw them too. And for the first time all day, he looked worried. Actually worried. Jacob followed his gaze. Then smiled. A slow smile. A dangerous smile. Because he recognized the riders. And apparently, so did the men working for Blackwood. The balance of power had just changed. Unfortunately for everyone. The newcomers weren't slowing down. Dust rolled across the western ridge. Growing larger. Closer. Closer still. Every eye on the ranch turned toward the approaching riders. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The lead rider working for Blackwood stared at the horizon. His confidence was disappearing. Fast. Because he knew something the others didn't. He recognized the men approaching. And he didn't want them here. Not at all. Within minutes the newcomers reached the ranch. 8 riders. Sunburned faces. Weathered hats. Men shaped by years of hard country. At their front rode an older marshal. Gray-haired. Straight-backed. Sharp-eyed. The kind of man who had spent decades separating truth from lies. The lead rider cursed under his breath. A small sound. Yet everyone heard it. Interesting. Very interesting. The marshal slowed his horse. Surveyed the ranch. The riders. The horse doctor. Jacob. Ethan. Then finally Aiyana. His gaze lingered there. For only a second. Then he looked toward Blackwood's men. I've been looking for you. Silence followed. The lead rider forced a smile. Funny. The marshal didn't smile back. Not really. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The balance of power had changed. Everyone could feel it. The lead rider glanced toward the open desert. Calculating. Searching for escape. The marshal noticed. Of course he did. You should stay where you are. The warning sounded calm. Which somehow made it more dangerous. The rider's jaw tightened. Then the horse doctor stepped forward. Still holding the ledger. His hands no longer trembled. Not much anyway. The old man opened the book again. The pages fluttered in the breeze. Then he showed the marshal the entry. The date. The horse. The blood. The names. The marshal studied everything carefully. Very carefully. Then nodded once. As if confirming something he'd suspected for years. Interesting. Very interesting. The old lawman looked toward Aiyana. You were there. It wasn't a question. The Apache woman stood taller. For the first time in 4 years. She didn't look away. Yes. The marshal nodded. Then waited. Patiently. Respectfully. Aiyana understood. This was the moment. The one she'd spent years avoiding. The one she'd spent years running from. The ranch fell silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Aiyana took a breath. Then another. And finally told the truth. Not part of it. All of it. She spoke about the river. The gunshot. Samuel Price. Henry Blackwood's son. The fear. The threats. The years of running. Nobody interrupted. Nobody rushed her. The story flowed like water finally breaking through a dam. When she finished, the silence felt different. Lighter. Cleaner. As though a burden had finally left her shoulders. The marshal looked toward Blackwood's men. Then toward the ledger. Then toward the ranch hands. Several of whom quietly nodded. Because rumors had existed for years. Whispers. Doubts. Questions. Now those whispers finally had a witness. The lead rider knew it too. His face hardened. Desperation replaced confidence. And desperate men often make foolish choices. His hand moved. Fast. toward his revolver. The same mistake he'd nearly made before. Only this time nobody hesitated. Jacob moved first. The giant covered the distance in 2 strides. The rider never cleared leather. One enormous hand seized his wrist. The revolver remained in its holster. The rider winced immediately. Several of his companions reached for weapons, then stopped, because Ethan already had his revolver drawn. Calm, steady, unshaken. And the marshal's men had done the same. The fight ended before it started. The rider slowly lowered his head. Defeated, not by force, by truth. Moments later the handcuffs appeared. One rider, then another, until Blackwood's men sat disarmed beside the corral. The ranch finally breathed again. Relief spread quietly, like sunrise. Hours later the marshal prepared to leave. The prisoners rode under guard. The ledger traveled with them. So did Aiyana's testimony. The old lawman paused beside her horse. You did the hard part. Aiyana frowned slightly. What part? The marshal smiled. Stopping. Interesting. Very interesting. Then he rode away. And for the first time in years, nobody followed her. Nobody hunted her. Nobody watched the horizon for signs of danger. The nightmare was over. A few months later spring arrived. The Arizona territory looked different beneath fresh grass and wildflowers. Eagle Lake remained beautiful, quiet, peaceful, as though none of it had ever happened. One afternoon Aiyana stood near the shoreline. The same shoreline where everything had begun. The water reflected the sky. The cottonwoods swayed gently. A familiar horse approached behind her. Then another. Aiyana smiled before turning around. Because she already knew. Ethan, of course. The cowboy dismounted, walking toward the lake. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt familiar now. Comfortable. Like an old friend. Eventually Ethan looked across the water. Strange place. Aiyana laughed softly. A little. The cowboy nodded. Most people remember where they got lost. He glanced toward her. I guess we remember where we got found. The words settled between them. Warm. Simple. True. Aiyana looked across the lake. Remembering. The humiliation. The fear. The blanket. The stranger who stopped when everyone else would have kept riding. Then she asked the question she'd carried for months. The question that mattered most. What made you stop that day? Ethan smiled. The same quiet smile. The same honest smile. He looked toward the water, then toward her, and finally answered. Because everybody else kept going. Silence followed. Beautiful silence. The kind that doesn't need filling. Aiyana smiled. For the first time in years. The future felt larger than the past. And beside her stood a man who understood exactly what that meant. The lake shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. The wind moved gently through the trees. And somewhere far away, a father who once carried a stranger through a snowstorm would have been proud. Very proud. Because kindness had completed its journey. The same kindness that began years ago in the mountains. The same kindness that stopped beside a lake. The same kindness that saved 2 lives.